want to know which planet was causing your suffering? How about Earth?
Hey everyone, Brandflakes here, back with a new Tribe 9 video. For today's video, I'll be covering each character and providing them a rating in 3 separate categories. These categories will be the nuke/burst category, which will be fights that should end as soon as possible, the DPS category, which involves fights that last a little longer than the first rotation of skills, and then the progression category, which will be fights that you are learning or are a bit more difficult and last probably longer than like the 2-minute mark. The reason why I want to make this video is because I've seen a lot of people ragging on the game and ragging on characters for not fitting into the nuking category, and I do think that the game is a lot more nuanced than that. Obviously, we only have 2 chapters, and therefore the bosses and mobs in this game are very, very weak compared to what the players have gotten to. So hopefully Chapter 3 solves that, and with that, hopefully we can see a further development in community attitudes. By community, I mean mostly Discord, because I don't really frequent the Reddit. So if you guys are in the Reddit community and you're seeing this and going, what are they talking about? That's why I'm talking about that. And obviously progression is very important because there's still plenty of new players out, and I think a lot of people develop at different paces. So hopefully if you're new and you're watching this video, being able to choose from the progression section will help you out with making the boss fights a bit easier. And hopefully I don't bait you into picking bad characters. So with that said, I'll be jumping into the character archive to review each character. I guess like side note, I haven't played every character to the fullest extent, so I'm basing it mostly off of discussions I've read, the kits I've read, and also just my assumptions on how they should function within a team. I'll also only be covering each character to the points that are relevant to each category, so I won't be covering their skills unless they're relevant to the rating. I won't be covering their potentials or transcendence unless I know that they're notable. So if I don't bring them up, feel free to use the character archives yourselves to read into them or try them out yourselves. The video would be like 45 minutes long if it went over literally everything, so this is just me trying to respect y'all's time and go over them more quickly. So with that said, starting with the main character, Kuronaka. Obviously you get this character at the very beginning, and he is actually an A tier across all 3 categories, although you could put an asterisk in progression. I think in progression you could probably put him in B+ tier, because you actually don't unlock his main progression ability until you're rank 4, which is I think pretty deep into chapter 4, or chapter 2 rather, which means he's kind of irrelevant for progression for a lot of fights if you're making through the story. So the important thing about the reason why he's in A tier for nuke is because his strategy skill provides a lot of break. If you spam his strategy skill, or if he's even just an AI, bouncing between his secondary skill into strategy skill will break the boss very quickly, and his AI is actually smart enough to do that. So if you want to pilot him and then swap to a different character after the break, you can do that, or he can just be an AI in your team, and that will provide break very quickly. The reason why he's also an A tier for DPS is because of that consistent break factor he gives. His AI is also smart enough to consistently cycle through his secondary attack into his strategy attack, so even as, you know, someone you're not controlling, he will provide very good, strong, sustained DPS. And again, because his break is very good, he'll continue giving you break in order to hit those tension phase breakpoints you need for your tension cards. Now his progression is on an asterisk again, because he can only unlock his healing on his second character potential, which only unlocks on rank 4. Now this is actually a lot of healing because it's percentage damage dealt, so at max it'll be up to 5% damage dealt, which adds up very, very quickly. He actually does noble healing. If you've ever done AFK farming, you'll have noticed that, or even if you're just playing him in the post game, you'll see him heal a lot more than you expect from a character who is not a healer. So if you are at rank 4, at least with Yo, you will notice him helping a lot more as you're playing those more difficult fights, and since he is free, he's really accessible. And just to note, he actually doesn't need any of these transcendences to be this powerful, so he's really cheap in that regard. Moving on to the other free character, the Deuteragonist, whatever that means. It's going to be Tsuki Iroha. I have Tsuki Iroha at S tier in nuking because she actually does a ton of damage. I think you do have to unlock a few potentials for that. We can see her first, or rather a few transcendences to get to that point. We can see her first transcendence is going to be buffing her strategy skill damage by a lot. Now this Iroha Ball Delta, I think this is her secondary attack. So if you just cycle through her secondary attack, or, oh sorry, it's her strategy skill. So when you activate her strategy skill, what's going to happen is that you actually buff her consecutive strategy skills, and because of her gameplay rotation, you're going to be buffing every subsequent strategy skill rather is going to be buffed, because you're always going to go into primary attack and secondary attack, or vice versa, and then just mash your strategy skill the moment you can, and then you'll have the buff in time for your next strategy skill, unless the boss is phasing or something happened where you get staggered and you can't cast. So in order to nuke, she does require a few loopholes. So like her third transcendence is also a big deal. When her strategy skill hits, it increases her loss of memory by 1 stack, which is going to be related to her ultimate, and each stack will buff her ultimate by 5%, which is going to stack up very quickly, which is why I have her in A tier for progression, but we'll get into that when we get to that. Her final transcendence is going to be something that buffs her support point damage, and this is going to make her really good for leading in break chains, because it'll buff the damage of every subsequent breaker or chain attacker in the line. So with all 3 of these, this is the reason why her nuke effectiveness is so high. It's because she is great at chain attacks, which you usually need for nuking, and she buffs up her damage by a lot by playing the game normally. Now obviously, usually you only get 1 or 2 stacks of loss of memory if you're going for the fastest possible nuke timing, but that's still really good because a 10% damage multiplier is still really high. Now her potentials, she does have... Here we go. She does have her second character potential. Iroha Ball Omega is going to be her ultimate attack, I believe. And so, as far as I'm aware, this is a spell. So I think she actively gives herself formation shift in time for the ultimate damage to come out. So this isn't like I use ultimate and then everything else after the ultimate hits is buffed. This is something that makes her stronger the moment she hits ult. So again, you saw her last potential earlier, or last you saw her last transcendence earlier that gave her 30 support for using her break chain. This will actually feed into her ultimate damage because of this final potential. So again, this is a rank 2 or a rank 4 unlocked potential, so you do have to invest into Iroha for a bit, but all these combined make Iroha a really strong nuker. And obviously she does spike very hard with these 3 transcendence perks, but you can still play Iroha without these. She's still quite good at T0 because you can still invest in the transcendence points, or rather you can invest in the support points through coordination, or even just through Patamons. So even if you can't get that extra damage, you'll still have like 70%, 80% of her max possible damage, maybe a little bit lower, but it's considering how weak the characters are or the monsters are compared to your characters, it probably won't matter that much. Now, she's B in DPS because she is pretty dependent on using her ultimate as, or rather the break chains as the point of burst, and Iroha herself is not that great at breaking, so you have to use other characters to supplement that. So she kind of falls behind in that regard, but because of how well she is able to navigate through all that, or because of the way that she's able to hit certain breakpoints and spikes and burst damage, I have her in A tier and progging, because she is a pretty good backup carry, even if you have no real investment in her. She does give your main carries and your main supports a lot more support points if you have her first potential invested, which is going to give her a lot more tension increase so that your supports and DPSs are a lot more stronger and can hit those tension phases that much faster. And overall, she is a character you can play pretty comfortably in the early game if you do want to play a ranged character instead of a melee character in Yo. The third character I want to talk about is going to be Jio Takinogawa. I have Jio as S tier in both nuking and DPS, but B tier in progging. Unlike Iroha, I don't have to go through that many hoops to explain what's going with Jio. He has a potential, his first potential, so it's very simple to invest in if you roll them early. That decreases defense of any character that's affected by Venom. So Venom is just a debuff he applies naturally by hitting something, and the moment they have Venom, he goes up to a 25% defense reduction. He is the only source of defense reduction in the game, so I just naturally have him in S tier for both nuking and DPS because he massively enhances all of your damage in that regard. Now, I have him in B tier and progging because when I was playing him in my teams, I actually tried to not play him when I was really struggling with like the initial opening of fights because he provides zero help in healing, defense, and as far as I can tell, breaking. He is really only good once you're at the point where you know the fight and you just need that little extra push to kill the boss or the mobs in a breakpoint that's a little sooner or before a phase or a mechanic. So he's really useful for that. But if you're playing him as a main, he's probably still fine for progression. You just have to deal with the fact that he's not going to be like healing you massively or saving your hide in time for a break chain or something. Now, Koishi is going to be the game's free healer. Being a healer in this game is kind of rough because it naturally puts you a bit lower in nuking and DPS unless your character has a funny quirk through potentials, and Koishi does have a funny quirk in the potentials. So I have him in nuke as B tier just because he does actually have a really good break potential. If you pilot him and you spam his secondary attack and constantly dodge, you're actually able to break quite quickly on Koishi, but that requires you to actually play him as a break unit, and then that's the only way he actually provides or helps towards nuking. You can leave him to his own devices, but if you do that, he isn't as good as break. So it's kind of like B tier with the side note that if you play him and pilot him, he could be B plus or even A tier in burst and nuking. Now, for the exact same reason that I might have put him in A tier for nuking, he's actually an A tier in DPS because of that strategy, dodge, or no, rather, secondary attack, dodge playstyle. And the reason for that is because he does have potentials that lead directly into being able to do more damage with his secondary attack. So his rank 4 unlock, or his second character potential, you can see here it says that when executing a secondary attack, consume 1 stack of poly A to increase your damage multiplier. This is a lot of damage. 60% per point adds up very, very quickly. And if you're wondering, oh, how am I supposed to gain poly 8 after burning all of it? You do need a few transcendences, unfortunately, to do that. And by few, I mean 1. He only needs 1 transcendence to really get the max, or to get the max value out of his second character potential. If you're good at counterattacking, then you'll be able to maintain your poly aid a lot higher than you would expect. And if you end up pushing him further, your main benefit is going to be through tension points. So you can actually cap out his, not cap out, but you can pull a lot of points into his first skill and his second skill, or his first potential and sector character potential, which will give him a lot more damage because action damage is multiplicative with secondary attack or damage multipliers in the game. So I think Koishi might even be S tier in DPS because I know there's like a Japanese YouTuber that's making videos of him soloing bosses with this guy. So he can be very, very good. You just need that first transcendence and to invest into him not being a healer. Speaking of healing, he is A in progression, especially if you put some points into the first character potential to make him heal even more. The reason why he's not an S tier for that is simply because it does take him a long while to access his healing. You can only use his strategy skill when he's at 5 stacks of poly aid, and obviously poly aid is something that naturally regenerates over time, which I can't really find at the exact moment. And you can accelerate that by using his again, his first transcendence, but it'll take a while to get there. So even with that, you're only inflating the access of the second healing. So you do have to play quite well in between Koishi heal bursts, and if you aren't able to, then you'll just kind of flop over. So he's only an A tier for that alone. Moving on to the second support, I'll be talking about Minami Oi. Minami Oi is going to be falling even further behind than Koishi in terms of both nuking and DPS, just because she herself has both no modifiers for, or no significant modifiers rather, for either, and she also doesn't give buffs to the allies to enhance that. She will be S tier in progression. Again, kind of the same problem as Yo, where her progression mostly unlocks at the latter half of this currently available story. Her second character potential gives her a massive boost to the shield she gets from chain attacking. I think it actually quadruples the value of these shields. So if you're able to chain attack at any amount of consistency, she gives you a massive shield and reduction. So it'll be really hard to kind of go down in these fights. And she is honestly a somewhat decent backup carry. She doesn't do any damage for the most part. She does have a buff on her first transcendence where she gets 25% more primary attack damage if her drone's close to her, which will happen if you're soloing at a certain point. And her ratios are decently respectable. Her attack animations are pretty fast, and they do a lot of hits, and they do a lot of damage. However, without any other form of damage in her potentials or her kit, she does, again, fall behind in that regard. That's why she's in B tier and DPS and not C tier, because she does do decently. But if you're forced to like solo an entire health bar of a boss with Oi, you definitely will notice the slow pace of it. The next character I'm going to talk about is going to be everyone's little bro, Hyakuichitaro Senju. I'm gonna call him Senju because Hyakuichitaro is a little bit of a mouthful. So Senju is going to be an S tier in nuking, a B tier in DPS, and a B tier in progression. He is S tier nuking because he is by far the fastest breaker in the game, in my opinion, or not my opinion, as far as I've read. I actually haven't used him for breaking because I don't really need him for that. But out of all the people, or out of everyone in the game, whenever I see him being evaluated, everyone goes, "Oh, but he's the fastest breaker." So with that alone, I'm gonna put him in S tier because for nuking, because being the fastest breaker means that he will have the shortest time to activate someone's ultimate or someone's chain tag. Chain tags do add a lot of damage to your burst, so that's really relevant. He's B tier in progression, in DPS and progression, because I tried using him as I played the game, and not only would he die super fast as an AI, he didn't really do anything useful. His ultimate ability is on a very low tension phased cost, but it doesn't really do anything. So I can't really recommend him for that, but I'm pretty sure he still does just fine if you pilot him in both DPS and progression, so that's why he's in B tier. Yeah, Senju is just an excellent breaker, and he'll probably serve you really well in that area. Tsuruko Semba, banner character from the first banner, she is going to be S tier in DPS, S tier in progression, and A tier in nuking. Semba is going to be kind of the reason why I even made this video. She is not that good at nuking because it takes time for her to set up, and because of that, I see a lot of people are putting her lower than she should be. She is really good at DPS. She's one of the best DPS characters in the game. Has some of the highest forms of the same damage while she's on her field and spamming strategy skill whenever it's up. And she also has great progression because, as might be a common occurrence, her healing is really good when you invest into her potentials. So her first character potential makes her healing way better, especially if you have support points invested in her character. And her second character potential is going to make her an excellent DPS because it trades off the healing that you get and instead gives you a massive damage buff for hitting people inside the field when she is smacking away. I don't think her transcendences are super important, just because they do add a lot to her damage and support ability, but for the most part, you get what you get when you pull her for the first time. She's a very excellent character if you're a new player and you're trying to get to the story. Moving on to another support, Eiji Todoroki is going to be, in my opinion, one of the more easily rated supports. He is actually A tier in both nuking and DPS because his kit really lends itself towards both. So for nuking, the reason why he's good is because of his second character potential. When he gains Euphoria, which is stacked through people attacking enemies while they're both inside his massive AoE taunt field, he gains a stack of Euphoria, and when you max it out, it goes up to 1.25 tension per Euphoria stack. So this actually rounds out to around 100 tension gauge total for maxing out his Euphoria, which means that you can actually hit tension phase 1 just through hitting people on top of his field, which is a massive deal because that means if you subsequently break on top of that, you not only hit tension phase 2, but with some extra help from, for example, Iroha, you can actually hit EX tension phase with one break. So because of that, he is automatically A tier, if not S tier, in both nuking and DPS. I only argue about S tier because Todoroki himself does no damage. And besides this burst potential, he really does nothing. So that's why he's C tier in Prog, because he's not really giving you good. I don't think he actually gives you any defense. He doesn't give you any damage, and you have to have him built somewhat in order to get these buffs from him. Otherwise, he's just really useless, as I learned the hard way as I tried to use him while I was playing the game for the first time. Now, Roku Saigo is a character that I've admittedly not played very much besides my AFK farming through Bave Diver, but I've seen him through a lot of streams and I've read through his kit, and I've got to say that he is not a good new character. He is honestly a middling DPS character. The reason why I have him in A tier is because he's so excellent at being a aggro holder, and he's really good at extending these fights. So the reason why I have him in A tier is because if you are a DPS player, or if you have like a character like Semba, like any other DPS character, or really any character in the game, you can be pretty certain that outside of the boss attacks that are forced onto your character, you'll be really safe and free to do any damage you want. That's why he's an S tier in progression, because he is just so good at holding aggro that when I watched a few fights, he made them look like a breeze because the player was allowed to ignore so many mechanics while they're fighting the boss. I don't think you need any potentials or investment in him. Obviously, he does have a few things that are really good to invest in, like his first character potential, but that's only because it just gives him healing, so it's more useful for like these AFK things where he's not getting provided consistent healing. If you're using him for progression, I assume you have a healer, so you need to invest even less in him. The next character is going to be my main, near and dear to my heart, Enoki Yukigaya. Enoki, I'm going to put her in S tier in nuking, A tier in DPS, and A tier in Prog. She's S tier in nuking because she has some of the highest damage in the game, courtesy of her second character potential. Again, if you don't have this unlocked, you'll probably think that I'm lying because she actually doesn't do very much without this potential. But as you unlock it, I mean, you'll see like it scales up to 120 all the way up to 180% extra damage, depending on how low she is, and that's a lot of damage. That combined with any points into the action damage enhancement, combined with any investment into Patamons and all that, makes her super strong. And the best part is that she gets this all with her base kit. Her transcendences are pretty helpful. I'm personally eyeing the final transcendence to make her even stronger. But honestly, like, you don't need any of these other things. Like, the crit damage multiplier is totally fine, but that requires you to build more heat. And because of how much damage she already does off the bat, you kind of just kill people before you hit max heat. So she's S tier for that. She's A tier. She's actually probably S tier in DPS as well. That's only if you're good at playing her, because you have to read all of these boss attacks. You can't get damage or else you lose all of your heat. But if you're really excellent at playing her, she'll be just fine in DPS. And then also in that regard, she's A tier in Prog, if only because of the massive amount of damage that she deals. She's not really a good progressor in terms of like letting you cheese mechanics. You do have to learn every single mechanic, but ironically enough, with learning every mechanic and dealing max damage with her, you can actually skip a lot of boss mechanics by simply not seeing them because you killed the boss too fast. So very high skill floor because she is a character that relies very heavily on your ability to dodge, read the boss movements, and counter in order to build her heat, but very rewarding if you do. The next character I'm going to talk about is a character that I actually didn't pull until recently, so this is again going to be more on what I've seen from him in gameplay and in discussions, and that's going to be our favorite CEO, Yutaka Gotanda. Gotanda is going to be an S tier in nuking, A tier in DPS, and A tier in Prog. The S tier nuking is mostly just because I've been told that he's really good at nuking. I don't know how true that is, but from what I've seen in gameplay, he is pretty good at killing things really quickly. I guess there's an addendum where his nuking is probably only S tier in killing trash mobs, because I think his damage is pretty limited against bosses, but I don't know if that's because people haven't tried nuking bosses with him, or if he's just not built for that. So for DPS, I have him in A tier just because I think he has to recharge his gauge, but maybe belongs in S tier. Gotanda is the character I have like the least authority to talk about, in my opinion, just because I've not played him at all or read his skills that closely. But I will say he's A tier in Prog, if only because of his ease of use and how flexible he is in his movement and positioning. From what I've seen, Gotanda can just kind of float around wherever he wants. He is not positional by any means. You just have to pay attention to very telegraphed boss attacks and then dodge or counter those as those come up. So if you're kind of new to these action RPGs and you need a bit more, I guess, like free space to use your brain for defensive maneuvers, Gotanda really can't go wrong, in my opinion, on that front. Now, going on to another character, this is my friend's favorite character, who I've admittedly not played enough. That's going to be Q. I've just gone ahead and put Q in A tier in both nuking and DPS because, from what I can tell, he does have a place in nuking. His ultimate, from what I can tell, does do a lot of damage, just like off the rip. And so that's why I have him in A tier as a nuke, because if you hit that and you build around it, it seems like you just slap things really hard. I have him in A tier as DPS as well, because the rest of his kit is built around stacking up and slapping the crap out of your enemies. And due to his kit as well, his kit is pretty evasive naturally, and that's why I have him in S tier as Prog, because if you pilot him, I'm not saying the game is super easy. You still have to learn boss mechanics and the fights and when to dodge and when to counter and all that. But because you have your dodges so much more accessibly than a lot of other characters, he's just S tier from that alone. So he's probably a really good character to learn if you want to learn the melee style of the game, just because he does have a bit more flexibility in that defensive aspect. But let me know if I'm lying about that. That's just what my friend told me and what I've seen. So yeah. The next character I'm going to talk about is going to be the newest character to the roster, Kazuki Aoyama. I'm going to go ahead and put Kazuki into S tier in nuking, A tier into DPS, and A tier into progging. I only have him in A tier in progging because everyone that I've seen pull him has already beat the game. So I'm assuming he's good because his summon seems pretty good at keeping you alive. But the reason why he's not in S tier in either DPS or prog is because he does have a limited resource. And if you're not piloting him and you're not breaking consistently and ulting with him specifically, you will run out of that resource very, very quickly. With that said, he is excellent at nuking. He is a breaker that is just barely below Senju in terms of how fast he can break. And because of that, he is just good at nuking. He also has the privilege of being one of the only map-wide ultimate AoEers in the game. So he's very, very good at killing trash mobs. And the best part is that he doesn't really need transcendences. I do think you need his third transcendence in order to be a good DPSer, because this gives him a much more accessible form of memory recharge. And I think for prog, he probably goes up by a tier if you have the first transcendence, because it makes his reflex shield give way more resistances to his allies, as well as himself, but mostly his allies. And yeah, third thing is just giving him more break, which will be really nice if you're progressing. The next character I'm going to talk about is a character that I've seen very little discussion about, very little gameplay of, and also a character that I think is unfairly roasted, and that's going to be Santaro Mita. From what I can see in his kit, Mita is actually pretty niche, but he's very excellent in what he does. The big power points to talk about is the fact that Mita actually gives a massive damage buff if you work towards his Inspire, and that's the reason why I have an A tier in nuking. It's not, it is apparently really fast to stack his Inspire if you bother with like playing him as an AI and then like running to the enemies to proc his dodges. But because it takes a bit more time than no time, I'm not going to put him in S tier because I think I'm not sure how good he is at breaking. With that as well, his support or that attack buff does actually last for quite a while. So I have him in S tier, or an A tier rather, as well for DPS. If you manage to proc his Inspire buff, he is just going to be doing really, really well. And with that said, I have him in A tier in prog. He might be S tier, but again, I didn't play him in there, so I don't want to put him in S tier in case it baits people. And the reason for that is because of the thing I keep talking about, the Inspire. The way he stacks Inspire is by using his strategy skill, and his strategy skill gives himself, or gives the enemy's illusion. And then the way that works is that when the target with illusion attacks, Mita dodges, or they have a chance to evade. And so with that evasion, I assume that means that a lot of boss mechanics can be accidentally dodged by Mita. So that means that he's actually a very excellent source of progression, because he's able to let you cheese certain mechanics that you would otherwise have been hit and subsequently die too. The last character on this list is going to be Miu Jujo. Again, don't know this character, so it'll be a very short discussion. She's S tier nuking, probably the best nuker in the game from what I've seen. Her ultimate is very, very cheap, but due to how her kit works, you do need to build up her ultimate anyways, so she's not like instantly nuking everything, but once you get max stacks on her passive, she will kind of just blow stuff up. I'm sure she's A tier in DPS and prog as well, but I know that she's very known for her nuke power, so I just have her S tier there, and just to play it safe, I'm putting her A tier and everything else. I know there's a way to play around her strategy skill instead of her ultimate, so maybe that bumps up to S tier in DPS and prog for newer players, but until I see that in action, I'll just have her there just in case. So yeah, that's gonna be my video. A bit longer than I want it to be, but I did want to cover the characters a bit more in detail. And yeah, if you have any differing opinions or agreeing opinions, please let me know. I'd appreciate it in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a good day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.